somewhere in the dry hills of southern Turkey. On a long ridge above the Harran Plain, there is a low rounded hill that for thousands of years looked like nothing at all. Before we go any further, if you want a brand new Earth topic every single night to fall asleep to, subscribe. One tap and a new story is waiting for you every evening. From a distance, this hill seems like any other gentle swell of earth, the color of pale honey in the morning and warm bronze at dusk. Goats have wandered across it. Farmers have plowed near its base. The wind has shaped its grasses for season after quiet season, but beneath that soft skin of soil and stone, something extraordinary was sleeping. Something older than the wheel, older than written words, older than the first clay pot, the first city wall, the first ploughed field, older even than farming itself. The hill is called Gobekli Tepe. The name means in the local language, the hill with a belly, or the pot-belly hill, because of its rounded shape. It rises only about 50 feet above the surrounding ridge. A person could walk to the top in a few minutes, pause to catch their breath, and look out across a wide, sun-bleached plain that stretches toward the distant blue line of the Taurus Mountains. And here is the strange part. The hill is not really a hill. It is, in large measure, something that human beings made, something they raised stone by stone, and then, for reasons no one fully understands, carefully covered up in. Beside this gentle mound, hidden for roughly 10,000 years, lay rings of enormous limestone pillars. Some of them stand taller than a grown person. The largest weigh as much as a small truck. They are shaped like the letter T, with broad flat tops and slender bodies, arranged in circles like silent gatherings of stone figures carved into their sides. In low, quiet relief are foxes, snakes, scorpions, wild boars, cranes, lions, and creatures that may be something else entirely. The carvings are patient and careful. Whoever made them took their time. The astonishing thing, the thing that has unsettled archaeologists since the site was properly excavated in the mid-1990s, is the age. The oldest layers at Gobekli Tepe date to about 11,500 years ago, and possibly earlier. That places them well before the rise of agriculture in this part of the world, before villages, before pottery, before the domestication of sheep and goats, before the first fields of wheat or barley were ever sown. For most of the 20th century, the story of human civilization was told in a certain order. First, the thinking went. People learned to farm. Farming gave them surplus food. Surplus food allowed permanent villages. Villages grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. And only then, once people had time and stability and stored grain, did they begin to build monuments, temples, stone circles, places of gathering and worship. Gobekli Tepe quietly turned that order upside down. Here, on this rounded hill, hunter-gatherers, people who lived by tracking gazelle and gathering wild grain, appear to have shaped, moved, and raised enormous stones in carefully planned circles. They did it without metal tools, without wheels, without writing, and, as far as the evidence currently shows, without yet living in permanent villages nearby. That single fact is the heart of tonight's mystery. Why would people who followed the seasons, who carried their lives on their backs, pour such immense effort into building something so heavy, so permanent, so deliberate? There are theories. Some researchers wonder if the site was a gathering place for scattered bands of people, a kind of meeting ground where different groups came together for ceremony and feast. Others suggest it may have been tied to belief, to ritual, to ways of marking the seasons or the dead. Still others ask whether the very act of building it might have nudged human beings toward farming in the first place, because feeding the workers required something new. The question remains open. The evidence is incomplete. The carvings do not speak. For tonight, simply hold the image in your mind, a low golden hill in a warm southern country. A wide plain below, hazy in the late afternoon light, and buried just beneath the surface, rings of patient stone giants, carved with the shapes of animals, raised by hands we will never see, for reasons we still do not understand. A temple older than the plough, a question carved before history began. Let your thoughts settle softly onto that hill, and let us begin, slowly, to wonder. Let us settle in and learn what this place actually is in the simplest of terms. The site is called Gobekli Tepe. The name comes from the Turkish language, and it means more or less potbelly hill. It is a low, rounded rise of earth in the south of modern Turkey, near the city of Şanlıurfa. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a gentle bump on the plain. A walk to its summit takes only a few quiet minutes, but inside that bump, beneath layers of soil and rubble, sit rings of carved stone pillars. These pillars are what make the place a mystery. They are shaped like the letter T, with a long upright body and a wide flat top. The largest of them stand about 5.5 meters tall, which is roughly the height of a small 2-story house. Each of these tall ones weighs somewhere between 10 and 20 tons. That is heavier than a city bus. And there are many of them. Dozens have been uncovered so far, arranged in circles and ovals, with smaller pillars set in walls around them. The stone itself is local limestone, soft enough to carve with patience, hard enough to last for thousands of winters. The pillars were cut from a quarry just a few hundred meters from the hill, where you can still see one giant, unfinished pillar lying in the bedrock, as if the workers set down their tools one afternoon and never came back. How they moved these stones, without wheels, without draft animals, without metal, is one of the simpler puzzles here. And even the simple puzzles do not have easy answers. The age is the part that makes the whole world lean in. The oldest layers of Gobekli Tepe have been dated to around 11,600 years ago. Some estimates push a little earlier, some a little later, but the careful consensus places its beginnings in the centuries just after the last great ice age eased its grip. To feel that number, try this. The Great Pyramid of Giza is about 4,500 years old. Stonehenge is about 5,000 years old. Gobekli Tepe is more than twice as old as either of them. It was already ancient when the first stones of the pyramids were quarried. It was already buried and forgotten before writing was invented anywhere on earth. And here is the small, quiet sentence that changes everything. It was built before farming, before fields of wheat, before herds of sheep penned at night, before bread, before beer, before pottery. The people who shaped these pillars hunted wild gazelle and gathered wild grains from the hillsides. They did not, as far as we can tell, live in villages of any real size. They were what we usually call hunter-gatherers, and yet they came together in numbers we cannot fully count, and they made this. The site covers about 9 hectares, which is roughly the size of 9 soccer fields, lying side by side. Only a small fraction of that, perhaps 5%, has been carefully excavated. The rest still sleeps under the soil. Ground-penetrating surveys suggest that more stone circles wait beneath the surface. Perhaps 15 or 20 more, possibly more than that. The hill is not a single temple. It is a cluster of them, built and rebuilt over a span of more than 1,000 years. The pillars are not blank. Their flat sides carry carvings of animals: foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, wild boars, lions, cranes. Some are deep relief, raised from the stone like a sculpture. Others are scratched in lightly, like a drawing. What these animals meant to the people who carved them, we do not know. There are theories, and we will sit with them in the sections to come. None of the theories are settled. And then there is the final basic fact, the one that lingers strangest of all. At some point, perhaps 1500 years after the first pillars were raised, the entire complex was deliberately filled in. Someone, or many someones, carried baskets of earth and rubble and bones up the hill and packed them around the pillars until the whole place was buried. They did not knock the stones down. They did not haul them away. They covered them gently, as if putting something to sleep, and then they walked away. And the hill kept its secret for the next 10,000 years, until a shepherd noticed an odd stone in the 1990s, and a quiet rumor began to spread among archaeologists. That is what Gobekli Tepe is, in the plainest words. A buried hill, full of carved giants, older than the plough. The question of why it exists is the question we will hold for the rest of the night. To understand how this strange hill came to exist, we have to travel back in our minds to a world that looked very different from ours. Imagine the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey about 12,000 years ago. The last ice age was loosening its long, cold grip on the northern world. Glaciers far to the north were retreating, slowly giving up the land they had held for tens of thousands of years. Here, in what would one day be called the Harran Plain, the climate was warming. The air felt softer. The seasons were finding new patterns. The land around Gobekli Tepe was not the dry, sun-baked country it is today. Pollen studies and ancient seeds tell us this region was once richer, greener, and more alive. Wild grasses grew in thick stands across the open ground. Pistachio trees and almond trees dotted the slopes. Gazelles moved in great herds across the plains. Wild sheep and wild goats picked their way along the rocky ridges. Boars rooted in the underbrush. Flocks of birds passed overhead in seasons of warmth and seasons of cold. Into this landscape walked small bands of people. They were hunter-gatherers, the oldest way of being human. They followed the herds. They knew which plants ripened in which month. They knew where the springs ran clear and where the flint outcrops broke into useful flakes. They carried their lives in skin bags and woven baskets. They built shelters that left almost no trace. For tens of thousands of years before this moment, people had lived this way across much of the world, leaving only soft footprints in the soil of time. This is the strange part. This is the part that makes the mystery hum quietly under everything we think we know. These hunter-gatherers, with no farms, no villages, no metal, no wheels, no written language, somehow gathered themselves together on this hill and began to build. They began to shape stones taller than a person and heavier than a small house. They began to carve animals into rock with tools made of harder rock. They began a project that would take generations. How did this happen? That is the question. The standard story of human history says that big projects came after farming. Farming gave people surplus food. Surplus food fed workers. Workers built monuments. That was the order, the textbooks said, for a long time. But Gobekli Tepe seems to flip that order on its head. The temple appears to come first. Before the farm, before the village, before the surplus. One leading theory says that the gathering itself, the shared purpose of building, may have been what slowly drew people into settled life. Another theory says that hunter-gatherer societies in this rich pocket of the world were already far more organized than we ever guessed, and we have simply been wrong about how complex their lives could be. We do not know which view is closer to the truth. Both may hold pieces of it. The evidence is thin, and the silence of the builders is deep. What we can say is that the conditions had to be right. The climate had to be generous enough to allow large groups to come together without starving. The wild grain had to be plentiful enough to feed gatherings of dozens, perhaps hundreds of people at once. The animals had to be abundant enough to provide meat for feasts. The stone had to be near, and the people, whoever they were, had to share some idea strong enough to bring them up that hill again and again. Picture them arriving in small groups across the warm months. Picture the smoke of cooking fires rising above the ridgeline. Picture the sound of stone striking stone, a steady tapping that carried across the open country. Picture the slow, patient work of shaping a pillar over many days. The chips of limestone collecting at the workers' feet like pale snow. Picture them sleeping under the stars, talking quietly in a language we will never hear. How long did the building take? We do not know exactly. The oldest layers seem to span many centuries. Generations were born, grew old, and died while the temple grew on the hill. Knowledge passed from parent to child. Techniques were refined. The plan, whatever it was carried forward by memory alone. Some researchers wonder whether a single founding vision guided the work, like a long, slow dream passed down a family line. Others suspect the site grew more organically, each generation adding its own idea to the work of those before. Both possibilities sit quietly in the soil. Neither has been proven. The hunters who moved these mountains left behind their stones, but they took their reasons with them. Walk closer in your mind to one of these pillars. Stand at its base and look up. The stone rises far above your head, taller than two grown people standing one upon the other. It is smooth in places, rough in others, and the color is a soft pale gold, the shade of old honey or weathered bone. This is limestone, and limestone, when you really think about it, is a strange and quiet kind of miracle. Limestone is made of bodies, tiny ones, countless small sea creatures that lived and died in ancient warm waters long before any human walked the earth. Their shells drifted down through the blue, layer upon layer, settling on the seafloor as a soft white mud. Over millions of years, the weight of more shells pressed down from above. The mud hardened, the shells fused, and what had once been a living ocean became, in time, solid stone. So the pillars at Gobekli Tepe are not really just stone. They are old life pressed into shape. The hunters who carved them held in their hands the remains of creatures that swam in seas that no longer exist. When they chipped away at the surface to reveal a fox, or a snake, or a strange standing figure, they were carving through millions of years of patient sediment. They almost certainly did not know this, but the stone knew. The stone remembered. The limestone of this region has a particular character. It is soft enough to be worked with simpler tools, yet hard enough to last for thousands of years once shaped. This is rare. Many stones are too brittle, or too tough, or too prone to crumbling. The builders chose well, or perhaps the land chose for them, by offering exactly the right material, in exactly the right place. We do not know whether they understood the qualities of the rock through long experience, or whether the choice was simpler than that. The minerals inside the limestone are mostly calcium carbonate. Calcium is a quiet element with a long story. Every atom of calcium in those pillars was forged inside a star. Not our sun, but older stars. Ones that burned and died before our solar system even formed. When those ancient stars collapsed and scattered their material across the dark, The calcium drifted for ages through space. Eventually, it became part of the cloud of dust and gas that formed our world. It settled into the oceans. It was taken up by tiny sea creatures to build their shells, and those shells became the stone that became the pillars. The carbon in the limestone has a similar history. Carbon, too, was made inside stars. It is the same element that makes up the bodies of the people who carved the stone and the bodies of the animals carved upon it. Carbon links the carver, the carved, and the carving. The pillar, the hand, the fox in low relief, all share the same starborn material, arranged in different patterns. There is iron in the soil around Gobekli Tepe, giving the earth its warm reddish tones in certain light. That iron was also forged in stars, in the final furious moments before they collapsed. The whole hill, in this sense, is built from the leftovers of stellar death, rearranged by water, time, and finally human hands. The water itself, the rain that fell on the limestone and slowly shaped it before the builders arrived, may have an even stranger origin. Some scientists think much of Earth's water arrived early in our planet's history, carried by icy bodies from the outer solar system. Others think more of it came from within the rocks of the forming Earth itself. The question is not fully settled, but every drop that softened the stone, every drop the builders drank as they worked, was very, very old. Knowing all this makes the pillars feel different. They are not simply carved rocks. They are gathered fragments of deep time, sea creatures, dying stars, ancient rain, soft sediment, slow pressure, patient erosion, and finally, a small group of humans with stone tools and an idea no one has fully decoded, all of it standing together on a low hill in what is now southern Turkey. The builders left no writing. They left no clear instructions. We do not know what they believed about the stone itself. Did they sense its age? Did they think of it as alive? Did they choose limestone simply because it was there? Or did they feel, in some way they could not have named, that this particular material carried something worth carving into? The question stays open, quiet as the pillars themselves, waiting in the soft gold light of a long, long memory. Look closely at the pillars of Gobekli Tepe, and you begin to see that they are not blank. The limestone faces are covered in shapes, animals mostly, foxes with long thin tails curling around the stone, snakes flowing in ripples, sometimes in groups of dozens, their bodies wound like braided rope, wild boars with stiff bristles along their backs, cranes standing tall on long legs, scorpions with curled stingers, vultures with broad wings spread wide, each one carved into the rock so carefully that you can still trace the lines with a fingertip, 12,000 years after the chisel set them down. And here is where the mystery deepens. These are not gentle pictures of deer or rabbits or fish. The animals chosen by the carvers are mostly dangerous ones, predators, stinging things, creatures that bite, that hunt, that frighten. Whoever shaped these stones did not pick the soft animals of the meadow. They picked the ones that watch from the dark edge of the fire. The forces that made this art possible were quiet and slow. Limestone is a soft stone, as stones go. It forms over millions of years on the floors of ancient seas, as the tiny shells of sea creatures settle and press together. The Harran Plain, where Gobekli Tepe sits, was once covered by warm, shallow water. After that water vanished, the layered rock remained, lifted up by the slow shoving of one piece of the Earth's crust against another. This is the same kind of pressure that builds mountains, only here it lifted gentle hills and left a ridge of pale stone, within reach of human hands. Because the rock is soft, a patient worker with a harder stone tool can carve it. Not quickly, not easily, but possibly. The builders used flint and other tougher stones to chip away at the limestone surface. They worked in low relief, meaning the animal shapes rise just a little out of the flat face of the pillar, as if pressing up through still water. The cuts are shallow but precise. The lines are confident. Whoever did this had done it before, many times, on many surfaces now lost to us. What no one fully knows is what these animals meant. One idea is that each carved creature was a kind of guardian or symbol for a specific group of people, almost like a family sign, a clan of the fox, a clan of the vulture. Under this theory, the gathering at Gobekli Tepe brought many small bands of hunter-gatherers together, and each group left its mark on a pillar. The stones would then be a record of who was present, written in the language of animals. Another idea is that the carvings show beings from a shared belief system, spirits, perhaps, or ancestors who walked the land in animal form. In this reading, the snakes and scorpions and vultures are not clans but powers, forces the builders feared, respected, or hoped to call on. The pillars become something closer to the inside walls of a sanctuary, painted with the unseen world. A third possibility, raised by some researchers, is that the carvings track the sky. They wonder if certain animal figures match patterns of stars as they appeared above the Harran Plain 12,000 years ago. Under this view, the stones would be a calendar, or a memory of an event in the heavens. Other researchers find this idea unconvincing, pointing out that the animals appear in arrangements that do not match any clear celestial map. The debate continues, and the carvings hold their silence. There is also the slow force of weathering, wind carrying fine grit, rain seeping into hairline cracks, the freeze of winter nights, and the heat of summer afternoons. Each of these presses on the limestone, year after year, softening the edges of every carving. The fact that we can still see the foxes and the snakes at all is partly because of how the site was treated by the people who built it. At some point, the entire complex was buried under earth and rubble. That covering shielded the stones from 12,000 winters. It is one of the great gifts of the site and one of its strangest puzzles, which we will return to later. For now, picture it. A pale stone pillar standing in the dim quiet. Across its surface, a procession of carved creatures, frozen mid-step, mid-coil, mid-flight. They were placed there by people whose names we will never know, in a language we cannot translate. The forces that lifted the rock, the hands that shaped it, and the meanings that filled it, all remain part of the same long question, still open beneath the hill. To picture the scale of these stones, imagine walking into a quiet room and meeting a figure made of pale limestone, standing taller than you, taller than your ceiling at home, taller even than the highest doorway you have ever passed through. The largest of the T-shaped pillars at Gobekli Tepe rise to about 5.5 meters. That is roughly 18 feet, or about the height of a 2-story house, measured from floor to roof. Now imagine that this figure weighs as much as 10 small cars stacked together. Some of the pillars are estimated at 16 tons. A few may push closer to 20. Hold that weight in your mind for a moment. 20 tons is the weight of an adult sperm whale. It is the weight of a city bus packed full of people. And these are not metal beams, shaped in a factory and rolled on wheels. They are single blocks of soft limestone, carved from a hillside with hand tools made of harder stone. There were no carts. There were no draft animals trained for hauling. The wheel, in any form we would recognize, was still thousands of years away. the stones had to travel. The nearest quarry sits a few hundred meters from the temple site. That sounds close until you remember the slope. The land rises and falls in gentle ridges, dotted with loose rubble and scrub. Moving a 16-ton block even 100 meters across uneven ground is the kind of task that today would require a flatbed truck and a crane. The builders had ropes, wooden rollers, sledges, and the strength of many shoulders pressed together. One careful estimate suggests it would take around 500 people working together to drag a single large pillar from the quarry to its final resting place. 500 people for one pillar. And the site holds dozens of these pillars, set carefully into stone sockets arranged in rings. The smaller pillars are easier to imagine, but no less strange. They stand around 3 to 4 meters tall, which is the height of a tall living room. Even these weigh several tons inside each ring. 2 especially large pillars stand at the center, facing one another like quiet partners in some forgotten dance. Around them, a ring of smaller pillars looks inward, as if watching or listening or waiting. The rings themselves are wide. The largest enclosure stretches about 20 meters across, which is roughly the length of a tennis court from baseline to baseline. Picture a tennis court ringed with stone giants, each shaped like a flattened letter T, each carved with foxes and snakes and birds. Then picture not one such enclosure, but at least 4 already uncovered, and ground-penetrating surveys suggesting perhaps 16 or more still buried beneath the hill. The whole mound covers about 9 hectares. That is roughly the area of 12 soccer fields placed side by side. Most of it remains unexcavated after more than 2 decades of careful work. Only a small fraction of the site has been brought back into daylight. The rest sleeps beneath layers of soil that were placed there deliberately by hands that lived long before written history. The age is harder to feel, but worth sitting with. The oldest layers are dated to about 11,600 years ago, perhaps a little older. To compare, the Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 4,500 years ago. Stonehenge began to take shape around 5,000 years ago. Gobekli Tepe is roughly twice the age of Stonehenge, and more than twice the age of the pyramids. If you laid the history of these monuments end to end, the gap between the pyramids and you, watching them today, is smaller than the gap between the pyramids and the carving of these pillars. And yet the carving is exquisite. The animals on the stone are not crude scratches. They are confident, flowing, deeply cut, sometimes in low relief that lifts them off the surface like quiet sculpture. Someone, or many someones, knew exactly how to work limestone with tools made of flint and basalt. Someone planned the rings. Someone chose where each pillar would face. How a society of hunter-gatherers organized this much labor, this much skill, and this much shared purpose remains an open question. One view holds that seasonal gatherings drew large groups together for shared work and feasting. Another suggests a smaller, more permanent population than once believed. Both ideas struggle with the sheer weight of the stones, the patience required, and the quiet, deliberate scale of what these unknown builders chose to leave behind. Imagine standing on the low summit of the hill in the soft hour just after dawn. The land stretches out around you in long, slow waves of pale gold and dusty green. To the south, the Heron Plain opens like a vast, shallow bowl, hazy at its edges, dotted with the faint shadows of distant ridges. To the north and east, low limestone hills roll quietly toward the horizon. There are no rivers in sight, no thick forests, no roads, just the wide open country breathing in the morning light. The hill itself rises gently from the surrounding plain, no more than 50 feet at its highest point. From a distance it looks like nothing special, a soft mound the color of bone and straw, crowned by a single old mulberry tree that has stood there for as long as anyone in the nearby villages can remember. Shepherds once passed over it without a second thought. Their flocks left small paths in the dry grass, winding around the slope. The wind moved through the thistles. The sun warmed the stones just beneath the soil, and for thousands upon thousands of years, no one knew what lay below. If you let your eyes wander down the flanks of the hill, you would see the colors shift in slow bands. Near the top, the earth is pale and chalky, almost white where the soil has been worn thin. Lower down, it deepens into warm tan, then into the dusty red of iron-rich clay. Scattered everywhere are small flakes of flint, broken pieces of limestone, fragments of an older world that the wind keeps uncovering and burying again. In spring, thin grass and wildflowers soften the slopes for a few short weeks. By high summer, everything is sun-bleached and dry, the color of old parchment. Now picture the surface as it would have looked 12,000 years ago, when the first builders climbed this same hill. The climate then was a little wetter, a little kinder. The plain below would have been dotted with stands of wild almond and pistachio trees, their leaves catching the breeze. Wild grasses grew thick in the lowlands, heavy with seed but not yet planted, not yet sown, not yet shaped by human hands into the long straight rows of a field. Gazelles moved across the open country in soft brown herds. Wild sheep and wild boar wandered the wooded folds. The hill rose above all of this, a quiet high place where a person could stand and see for many miles. This is the part that still stops researchers in their tracks. When the builders carried the first stones to this hill, no one on earth had yet learned to farm. There was no bread. There was no wheat that had been tamed into the plump golden grain we know today. There were no villages of mud brick houses, no granaries, no domesticated cattle, no pottery. The people who shaped these pillars lived by hunting, by gathering, by following the seasons. And yet they chose this hill, and they chose to move many tons of stone up its slope, and they chose to do it together. The surface of the hill today still hides most of what they made. Only a small portion has been carefully uncovered. Walking the side, you see the tops of the great T-shaped pillars rising from circular enclosures cut into the earth. The stones are a soft, warm grey, sometimes nearly white, where the limestone has been freshly cleaned, sometimes streaked with the rust-colored stains of long burial. Around them, the excavated walls curve in gentle rings. Beyond the dug areas, the rest of the hill waits, quiet and unopened, its secrets still pressed into the soil. Standing here, the open question feels almost physical. Why this place? Why this hill? Why these stones, raised by hands that had never planted a seed? One idea, held by many researchers, is that the act of gathering to build something this large may itself have helped push people toward farming, because feeding the workers would have demanded more food than wild plants could easily provide. Another view suggests the opposite, that some early experiments with tending wild grains had already begun, even if true agriculture was still centuries away. The surface gives no clear answer. It only gives the view and the wind and the soft golden plain stretching out below, older than bread, older than wheat, older than the patient turning of soil. The hill simply sits there in the morning light, holding its question, waiting for the next careful trowel to scrape away another thin layer of the long, long story buried beneath its skin. just a short walk from the main hill at Gobekli Tepe. The ground tells another part of the story. Here, in the soft limestone of the surrounding plateau, you can still see the outlines of pillars that were never finished. They lie half carved into the bedrock, their shapes traced into the stone, as if the workers had stepped away for a moment and never come back. One pillar in particular rests on its side, still attached to the living rock along its base. It is enormous. Measured end to end, it stretches nearly 7 meters, and archaeologists estimate it would have weighed around 50 tons. This is the quarry. This is where the giants were born. Standing at the edge of these abandoned blocks, a quiet puzzle settles over the mind. The workers who shaped these stones had no metal, no iron chisels, no bronze hammers. The world had not yet learned to smelt anything. The only tools available to them were other stones, harder stones, brought from elsewhere, chipped and rounded into handheld picks and pounders. Many of these have been found scattered across the site. Small, fist-sized hammerstones of flint and harder rock, worn down at the striking ends, dulled from long use. With these alone, somehow they cut shapes the size of small ships from the bedrock. The process must have been astonishingly slow. Strike by strike, hour by hour, a worker would peck a narrow groove into the soft limestone, deepening it bit by bit until the pillar could be undercut and freed. Modern experiments suggest that shaping a single large pillar this way could have taken many people many months. And yet, at Gobekli Tepe and the quarries around it, there are dozens of such pillars, some finished, some left mid-birth, some lifted, moved, and set upright, others lying where they were carved, as if the workers simply ran out of time. That last detail is one of the gentle mysteries of this place. Why are some pillars abandoned? Were they cracked during carving and rejected? Did the project they were meant for change? Did the builders lose interest or move on to a different design? No one knows. The unfinished stones lie there still, slowly weathering under the same sun that shone on the people who began them. Then there is the question of how the finished pillars were moved. From the quarry to the temple circles is a distance of a few hundred meters, across uneven ground. A 50-ton block does not slide easily. One leading idea is that the builders used wooden rollers, sledges, and ropes woven from plant fibers, pulled by large teams of people working together. Some researchers suggest that animal hides, soaked and laid under the stones, may have reduced friction. Others wonder if simple ramps of packed earth, raised and lowered along the route, helped guide the stones forward. A competing thought is that the work was done in stages, over years, with each pillar moved slowly during seasonal gatherings, when many hands were available. There is no settled answer. No drag marks have survived, no ropes, no sledges. The tools and methods are gone, leaving only the result behind. The hammerstones themselves raise another quiet question. There are not nearly as many of them as you might expect for a project this size. If hundreds of workers labored here for generations, where are the great heaps of broken, discarded tools? Some researchers think the workers carried their tools home with them, or reused them down to nothing. Others wonder if many of the tools lie beneath unexcavated parts of the site, still waiting in the soil. The full picture has not yet emerged. What does emerge, even from this incomplete view, is a sense of patience almost beyond imagining. The people who built Gobekli Tepe had no deadline, no calendar pressing on them. They worked in the slow, steady way of those who measure progress in seasons rather than days. A pillar might begin under one generation and rise under the next. A circle might be planned by elders who would not live to see it finished. That slowness sits at the heart of the mystery. It suggests a society that could plan across lifetimes, that could agree on something important enough to outlast the people who started it. We do not know what they called this thing they were making. We do not know what songs they sang while they worked, or what stories carried them through the long, hot afternoons of striking stone against stone. The quarry holds its silence. The unfinished pillars wait, half emerged from the bedrock, as if the moment of pause has lasted 12,000 years and might, somehow, end tomorrow. Of all the puzzles that rise from the hill of Gobekli Tepe, one stands quietly apart from the rest. The builders, after generations of labor, after raising stones taller than themselves, and carving the patient shapes of foxes and snakes and silent watchers into limestone, did something strange. They buried it. They filled their own temple with earth and stone and broken bone, until the great pillars stood up to their shoulders in rubble. Then they walked away. This is not the slow burial of time. This is not wind and dust settling over centuries of neglect. The fill is deliberate. It came in by the basket load, brought by human hands, and no one yet knows why. The cycles of the hill seem to follow a strange rhythm. A circle of stones would be raised, used for some span of years, and then carefully covered over. Sometimes a newer circle would be built nearby, smaller, simpler, as if the energy of the builders was slowly fading. Sometimes the fill itself became the foundation for whatever came next, layer upon layer. The hill grew taller, not from erosion, but from intention. The mound we see today is partly the temple, and partly the long, patient act of hiding it. One theory imagines this burial as a kind of closing ceremony. A temple, in this view, has a lifespan. It is born when the first pillar rises. It breathes through the gatherings held within it, through the feasts, through the firelight on carved stone. And when its time is finished, when a leader dies, or a generation passes, or some quiet meaning shifts in the minds of the people, the temple is laid to rest, buried like a body, returned to the earth that gave up its stones. Another theory is gentler and more practical. Perhaps the fill was structural. Perhaps the great pillars, balanced on shallow sockets, began to lean. Perhaps the builders packed earth around them to hold them upright, the way you might prop up a tired old fence. In this view, the burial is not ritual but repair. The temple was loved enough to be saved, even if saving it meant smothering it. A third possibility sits somewhere between the two. The fill contains bones, many of them, from feasts long finished, animal bones, broken and scattered, mixed with stone tools and ash. It is as if each burial sealed in the memory of a great gathering. The food, the fire, the shared work, all pressed down into the soil with the stones, closing one chapter so that another could begin. None of these explanations is settled. Each carries its own quiet weight, and each leaves something unanswered. If the burial was purely ceremonial, why bother packing the fill so densely, with such care for the pillars beneath? If the burial was structural, why bury everything, including the smaller stones that needed no support? If it was the closing of a feast, why repeat the act again and again across the centuries, as if the hill itself were breathing in and out? There is something deeply human about the rhythm of it. We build, we use, we close. We build again. The cycles of Gobekli Tepe seem to mirror the cycles we still feel in our own lives. The slow construction of a home, the long years of living in it, the quiet moment when it is left behind. The hill repeats this gesture, over and over, until the temple itself becomes a kind of slow heartbeat in stone. The burial may also be why the site survived at all. Many ancient places have been ground down by weather, scattered by farmers, broken apart for newer walls. Gobekli Tepe was protected by the very soil its builders pressed against it. The pillars stayed upright because the earth held them. The carvings stayed sharp because no wind reached them. The dark of the fill became a kind of preservation, a long sleep beneath the Anatolian sun. So we are left with a strange thought. The mystery of the hill is not only how it was built, it is also how it was hidden. The same hands that carved the foxes and the cranes also carried the baskets that buried them. Whatever the builders believed, they believed in endings as much as beginnings. They believed that a temple could be put to sleep on purpose. The reasons for that long sleep remain just out of reach. We can dig and measure and date the layers. We can count the bones in the fill, but we cannot yet hear the quiet thought that moved through the minds of those who closed each circle and walked away into the hills. The pillars at Gobekli Tepe are not blank. Across their pale limestone faces, animals move in slow, careful procession. Foxes leap, vultures spread their wings, snakes coil in long ribbons down the sides of the stones. Scorpions raise their tails, wild boars lower their heads. Cranes step on long, thin legs across the smooth surface. The animals are everywhere, and they were chosen on purpose. The question is why these animals and not others? The fox appears more often than almost any other creature. It crouches on the side of a pillar, tail curled, body tense and watchful. Sometimes the fox lies flat across the front of the giant T-shaped stone, almost like a hunting trophy laid across a shoulder. Foxes are clever, quick, and a little secretive. They live at the edges of human places. Some researchers wonder if the fox stood for cleverness or for some kind of guardian role. Others think it may have marked a clan, a family, a group that traced itself back to the fox. No one truly knows. The vulture is even stranger. On certain pillars, a great bird stands with wings half open, holding what looks like a round object, possibly a human head. Vultures in many ancient cultures were linked to the journey of the dead. They cleaned the bones. They carried the spirit upward or downward, or somewhere between. One theory suggests the vulture carvings hint at an early sky burial practice, where bodies were left exposed and the birds did the slow, sacred work. Another theory says we are reading too much into it, and the vulture may simply have been a powerful neighbor in the hills, common in the skies above the site. The carvings do not explain themselves. Snakes flow down the stones in long lines, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, sometimes braided together like rope. In some sections, dozens of snakes ripple across a single pillar in tight rows. Snakes shed their skin. They vanish into cracks in the earth. They appear and disappear with the seasons. In many later cultures, snakes carried meanings of rebirth, of the underworld, of hidden knowledge. But Gobekli Tepe is older than those cultures. Whatever the snake meant to the builders may have been the first version of an idea humans have been retelling ever since. Or it may have meant something entirely different, something we have lost. Scorpions appear too, with their tails arched and their claws open. Wild boars stand sturdy and short-legged. Lions, or something close to lions, snarl on the sides of a few stones. The animals are not soft. They are not the gentle creatures of a farm. They are the dangerous neighbors of a hunting world. The builders did not carve sheep or goats or domesticated grain. They carved the things in the wild that watched them back. The mix of animals also raises a quiet puzzle about the environment itself. Some of these creatures, like the cranes, are migratory. They come and go with the seasons. Others, like the leopards, no longer live in that part of the world at all. The carvings preserve a snapshot of a landscape that has changed. The hills around Gobekli Tepe were once greener, wetter, more alive with animal traffic than the dry plains we see today. The temple was built inside a living, moving ecosystem. and the stones remember neighbors that the soil no longer holds. What no one can read is the meaning. The animals are arranged in groups. Some pillars carry only one species, others carry many. There are patterns, but the patterns refuse to translate. One researcher might see a calendar of seasons in the carvings. Another might see a story, or a song, or a list of ancestors. A third might see clan symbols, the way later peoples carved family crests into wood and stone. Each theory fits some of the evidence and leaves the rest unexplained. There is also the possibility that the meaning was never meant to be read by outsiders. The carvings may have spoken only to the people who already knew the story. The pillars may have been mnemonic devices, reminders, prompts for a teacher to tell a tale that the listeners had heard 100 times. In that case, the language was never written on the stones. It lived in voices, and the voices are gone. So the animals stand watch on the pillars, calm and patient and silent. Foxes still curled, vultures still holding their round burdens, snakes still flowing downward into the buried earth. They were neighbors once, to the builders and to the world the builders lived in. They are still neighbors now, to a question we cannot yet answer. The stones at Gobekli Tepe arrange themselves in circles. That alone is worth pausing over. Out of all the shapes a builder might choose, these early hands chose the round enclosure, the gathered ring, the bowl of standing stones facing inward towards something unseen. And inside the larger rings, at the very center of each enclosure, stand two pillars taller than all the others, twin giants, paired and facing one another like a quiet conversation, held in limestone for 12,000 years. This is the pattern that repeats across the hill. A ring of pillars around the edge, smaller in stature, their flat sides turned inward as if listening, and in the middle of that ring, two great central pillars rising even higher, set close together, sometimes joined by the suggestion of arms and hands carved into their stone bodies, the circle within the circle, the watchers around the watched. The tallest of these central pillars reach close to 5.5 meters. That is nearly the height of a 2-story house, hewn from a single piece of limestone, lifted upright, and balanced in a shallow socket cut into the bedrock. Each one weighs somewhere between 10 and 20 tons. Some estimates push the largest to 50 tons or more. These figures are extreme for any era, but they are almost impossible to imagine for a people without wheels, without metal, without draft animals strong enough to haul such weight. The oldest layer of the site, known as Layer 3, holds these largest rings and the tallest pillars. It is also, paradoxically, the layer that shows the finest carving. The animals on these older stones are more detailed, more confident, more skillfully shaped than those in the upper, younger layers. The art does not grow more refined over time. It grows simpler. Something at Gobekli Tepe was at its peak in the very beginning. Whatever knowledge built the first rings, that knowledge seems to have slowly faded across the generations that followed. The deepest enclosures sit several meters below the modern hill surface. Excavators had to remove tons of carefully placed fill to reach them, and when they reached the floor of the oldest ring, they found polished limestone, almost like a terrazzo surface, smoothed by methods that remain unclear. One question that lingers is how a culture without pottery, without written language, without any of the tools we associate with civilization, produced a floor so flat and so finely finished. The widest enclosures stretch around 20 meters across. That is the length of a modest swimming pool, ringed by stone giants, open to the sky, with two carved figures standing guard at the heart of the space. Picture, standing in the center of that ring at dawn, the pillars throwing long shadows across the polished floor, the carved foxes and snakes and vultures watching from every direction. The scale alone is enough to quiet a person. The scale alone makes you wonder what was meant to happen there. The oldest carbon dates from the site reach back roughly 12,000 years. That is older than the pyramids by about 7,000 years, older than Stonehenge by about 6,000, older than the first known cities, older than writing, older than the wheel, older than the smelting of metal. When the builders of Gobekli Tepe were raising their central pillars, much of the world was still emerging from the long cold of the last ice age. Mammoths had only recently vanished from parts of Eurasia. The seas were still rising. The map of the world looked nothing like it does now. And yet, in this moment of deep antiquity, someone decided that two great stones should stand at the center of a ring, facing each other, with smaller stones gathered around them in a careful circle. The pattern is so consistent across multiple enclosures that it cannot be accidental. The central pair seems to matter. One theory suggests they represent ancestors, two specific honored figures rendered in abstract human form, with their belts and loincloths and folded arms carved into the stone. Another idea is that they represent gods, or guardians, or pairs of mythic beings whose names and stories have been lost. A third view simply holds that we may never know who or what those two central figures were meant to be. What remains certain is the geometry, the circle within the circle, the two at the heart of the many, a shape repeated, deliberately, by hands that had no written instructions to follow, no architectural plans, no temples elsewhere to copy. The pattern came from somewhere inside them, and that inner source is one of the quietest, deepest puzzles the hill still holds. Step closer to one of the great T-shaped pillars in your imagination and let your eyes settle on the surface of the stone. From a distance, the limestone looks pale and smooth, almost like old bone left in the sun. Up close it tells a different story. The surface is freckled with tiny shells, no bigger than grains of rice. These are the remains of small sea creatures that lived and died at the bottom of an ancient ocean, long before the hill ever existed. That is the first quiet detail. The temple stands on stones made of dead things. The pillars were once a seabed. Each shell, pressed into the rock, is a small clock, counting backward through millions of years. The builders chose this stone, perhaps without knowing what it contained, and shaped it into the watches that still stand today. The cream-colored limestone of the Heron Plain forms in slow, patient layers. Rainwater seeps through it. Groundwater carves soft channels inside it. When you run a finger along the surface of a pillar, you sometimes feel a faint roughness, where one of those ancient layers ended and another began. The builders polished the stone, but they could not erase the bedding lines. The geology shows through, like the grain of old wood. Look closer still, and you find tool marks, small, repeated peck marks, made by striking the stone with a harder stone again and again. In some places, archaeologists have counted thousands of these little impacts on a single pillar. Each one is the memory of a single blow by a single hand. We cannot know whose hand. We cannot know whether the worker hummed, or rested, or talked with others nearby. We only know they struck the stone, and then struck it again, until the shape they wanted began to appear. The carvings of animals hide quiet details too. On one pillar, the fox has tiny grooves running along its tail, as if to suggest fur. On another, a snake's body is divided into careful repeating segments, like beads on a string. A vulture's wing shows feather lines so fine that some are barely a fingernail wide. Whoever made these marks worked slowly, with great care, on stone that did not forgive mistakes. A slip of the tool could ruin hours of work. There are subtler patterns that only emerge when researchers map the whole site. Some pillars lean very slightly. Some are taller than others by a small margin. Certain carvings appear together in pairs across different stones, while others stand alone. Whether these patterns mean something, or whether they are simply the natural variation of handmade work, remains an open question. One idea is that the small differences encode meaning we have lost. Another idea is that they are just the fingerprints of different carvers, each with a slightly different style. Both views still have room to grow. The fill that buried the site holds its own quiet wonders. Inside the layers of dirt and rubble, archaeologists have found broken animal bones, flint tools, and small fragments of carved stone. The bones are mostly from wild animals: gazelle, aurochs, wild boar, wild sheep. Under a microscope, the cut marks on these bones show how the meat was removed. The pattern suggests large gatherings, with many animals butchered at once. But whether these were feasts, offerings, or simply meals taken during long work days, no one can say for certain. There are tiny beads in the fill as well, made from stone and bone, some no larger than a lentil. There are small carved figurines, worn smooth by time. There are flint blades, sharp enough to still cut skin, and grinding stones that may have processed wild grains long before anyone planted a field. Each object is a small clue. Each clue points in several directions at once. The limestone itself keeps a slower kind of record. Rainwater has etched faint lines down the faces of some pillars, marking the centuries since they were last buried. Lichens, those crusty patches of life that grow where almost nothing else can, cling to certain exposed surfaces in pale greens and rust oranges. They grow only a fraction of a millimeter each year. A patch the size of a coin may be older than many human lifetimes. All of these small things together form a quiet kind of evidence. They tell us that real people stood here, struck stone here, ate here, and left their fingerprints in dust and fill. They do not tell us why. The big question still hovers above the small details, soft and unanswered, like mist that has not yet decided whether to lift or settle. The story of how we came to understand this hill is itself a slow unfolding, told across more than half a century. In the early 1960s, a team from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University walked the dry ridges of southeastern Turkey, mapping the surface of the land. They were looking for traces of the earliest farmers. They climbed the rounded hill near the village of Oranchik and noticed broken pieces of limestone scattered across the top. The fragments looked, to their trained eyes, like the leftovers of a medieval cemetery. They made a brief note and moved on. That note sat in a quiet archive for nearly 30 years. The hill kept its secret. Sheep grazed across its slopes. Farmers plowed the lower fields. The wind carried thin clouds of pale dust over the rounded summit, and no one suspected what waited just beneath the soil. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited the site. He had spent years working at a nearby settlement called Navali Tsori, which held its own strange stones. When he stood on the hill and looked at the scattered limestone chunks, he saw something the earlier survey had missed. These were not gravestones. They were broken tops of something much older, something buried, something the plough had only just begun to brush against. He famously described the moment with a quiet kind of certainty. He could either walk away, or he could spend the rest of his life there. He chose to stay. The first season of digging began in 1995. The team worked carefully, brushing soil away, grain by grain. Within weeks, the tops of T-shaped pillars began to rise from the earth. Each one was taller than a person. Each one was carved with animals. There were no signs of houses around them. There were no graves. There were no cooking hearths in the usual sense. The site did not behave like a village. It behaved like something else entirely, and the question of what that something was began to take shape. One early theory grew naturally from the bones found in the backfill. The team uncovered enormous quantities of animal remains, mostly gazelle and wild aurochs and wild boar. The numbers were staggering. Whoever gathered here did not gather lightly. They feasted. They feasted on a scale that suggested hundreds of people coming together, perhaps from great distances, perhaps for days at a time. Schmidt proposed that the site was a place of communal gathering and ritual feasting, a meeting ground where scattered bands of hunter-gatherers came together to share food, share stories, and build something larger than themselves. This theory carries real weight, but it is not the only one on the table. Some researchers wonder whether the feasting evidence has been overstated. The bone counts are large, yes, but they accumulated over centuries, perhaps over 1,000 years or more. Spread across that span, the feasts may have been smaller and less frequent than the raw totals suggest. Others point out that we have no clear evidence of where the feasters slept, where they cooked, or how they organized themselves between gatherings. The picture remains incomplete. A competing idea holds that the site may have served a smaller, more specialized group. Perhaps a community of ritual specialists lived nearby, tending the pillars, leading ceremonies, and welcoming visitors only on certain occasions. In this view, the site is less a great communal hall and more a sacred precinct, kept by a few and visited by many. The truth may lie somewhere between these two pictures. It may lie outside both of them. Klaus Schmidt continued his work at the site until his sudden death in 2014. He never saw the full extent of what lay buried. Geophysical surveys, using ground-penetrating radar and magnetic imaging, have since suggested that what has been uncovered may be only a small fraction of the whole, perhaps a tenth, perhaps less. Beneath the soil, more circles wait, more pillars, more carved animals staring out from the limestone with their patient eyes. Each new excavation season brings questions rather than answers. A pillar emerges with an unexpected carving. A layer of fill reveals tools made of flint, not metal. A pattern of post holes suggests something the team had not predicted. The history of discovery here is not a straight line toward truth. It is a slow circling, a gradual learning that the deeper we dig, the less certain we become about what these people meant by the things they made. Look up from the buried hill for a moment and consider the sky that hangs above it. The sky over the Haran plain has always been wide and clear, a soft dome of stars when the night comes, a slow wash of orange and gold at dawn. The builders of Gobekli Tepe would have known this sky the way we know the rooms of our own homes. They watched it every night, with no lamps, no city glow, nothing between their eyes and the deep field of stars. Some researchers wonder if the temple was not only a gathering place on earth, but a kind of mirror of the sky. The idea is gentle and strange. They look at the carvings on the pillars, at the foxes and snakes and birds, and they ask whether some of these shapes might represent groups of stars. The constellations we know today, the bull, the scorpion, the hunter, may not be the same shapes a hunter-gatherer saw 12,000 years ago. But the sky itself has shifted very slowly over those long centuries, and the bright stars are mostly the same bright stars. One researcher proposed that a particular pillar, often called the vulture stone, shows a map of the sky on a specific ancient day. He suggested the carvings record the memory of a comet or a meteor swarm striking the Earth long ago. It is a bold idea, and it has caught the imagination of many people. Other archaeologists, though, are not convinced. They point out that the carvings appear all across the site, on many pillars, and they do not seem to follow the geometry of constellations in any clear way. The animals may be totems, or clan symbols, or spirits, or stories we will never recover. The sky theory remains one possibility among several. What seems harder to dismiss is the strange alignment of certain enclosures. A few of the great stone circles appear to face roughly toward the rising or setting points of bright stars. Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky, has been suggested as one possible target, but star positions drift over thousands of years, and pinning down exactly where Sirius would have risen for the builders is delicate work. The alignments may be intentional, or they may be coincidence. The evidence is incomplete, and honest researchers will tell you so. There is something quietly humbling in all of this. We tend to picture early hunter-gatherers as people focused entirely on survival, on the next meal, the next shelter, the next migration of game. The sky theory, even if it turns out to be wrong, reminds us that these people had time to look up. They had time to notice. They watched the same moon we watch, traced the same slow turning of the seasons, and felt the same small wonder when a bright star rose for the first time after a long absence. The land around Gobekli Tepe helps make sense of this. The Haran plain is wide and open, ringed by low hills. From the top of the temple mound, the horizon stretches in every direction, clean and unbroken. It is the kind of place where the sky almost demands attention. At sunset, the light slides low across the limestone, turning everything a warm rose color. At night, the stars come down so close you feel you could walk into them. Some scholars have also noticed that the builders seem to care a great deal about the four directions. Pillars are arranged with a sense of geometry, with central stones often standing in pairs, facing outward. Whether this geometry reflects sky watching or simply a shared sense of sacred space is another question without a settled answer. Many ancient cultures arranged their sacred sites with attention to where the sun rose, where the longest shadow fell, where the brightest stars climbed above the hills. Gobekli Tepe may be the oldest known echo of this habit, or it may be something else entirely, a pattern we are reading into stones that meant something completely different to the people who raised them. What is striking is simply this. Long before farming, long before writing, long before cities, people stood on a quiet hill and built something that pointed, perhaps, towards the stars. They were not waiting for civilization to invent wonder. They already had it. Whatever they saw when they looked up, whatever stories they told about those distant lights, those stories are gone now. The sky above the stones keeps turning, slow and patient, and the carved animals keep their long silence beneath the soil, and the question of what the builders were watching drifts upward into the dark, unanswered. Something strange happens when you stand among the pillars of Gobekli Tepe and let your eyes drift across the carvings. The same animals appear again and again. Foxes curl along the ribs of the stones. Snakes flow in long ribbons. Vultures spread their wings. Scorpions raise their tails. Wild boars bare their tusks. These are not random doodles. They are a vocabulary. And that vocabulary seems to echo, faintly, in places far beyond this single hill. In the centuries that followed the temple's burial, other peoples in the same region carved or painted some of these same creatures into their walls and pottery. At Çatalhöyük, a much later settlement to the west, vultures appear on plastered walls in scenes that suggest something solemn about death. Leopards face each other in pairs. Bulls' horns rise from benches. The styles are different, the materials are different, but the cast of animals is oddly familiar. One question that lingers in the minds of researchers is whether these later villages inherited fragments of a much older belief, one first whispered in stone on a hill in what is now southeastern Turkey. It is only a possibility. Other researchers point out that the animals carved at Gobekli Tepe are simply the animals that lived in the region. Foxes, vultures, and snakes were everywhere. Any culture in that landscape would naturally include them in its art. Shared animals do not have to mean shared beliefs. They might only mean shared neighbors. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, and we may never untangle the two threads. What makes the question so interesting is how widely these symbols seem to travel through time. Vultures in particular appear in many ancient cultures of the Near East as guardians of the dead, as guides between worlds, as patient watchers at the edge of life. Whether the people of Gobekli Tepe thought of them in this way, no one knows. The carvings themselves are silent. They show the bird, sometimes near a headless human figure, sometimes alone. The meaning sits just out of reach, like a word you cannot quite remember. The connections may run deeper than animals. Across the wider region, archaeologists have found other early sites with carved pillars, circular enclosures, and similar T-shapes. Karahan Tepe lies only a short distance away. Sifa Tepe, Hamzan Tepe, Taşlı Tepe, and others form a kind of scattered family of related places. Some are older than the agricultural villages that came later. Some overlap with them. Together they suggest that Gobekli Tepe was not a single, isolated wonder. It was part of a wider world of belief that stretched across hills and valleys for hundreds of miles. What bound that world together, we can only guess. One quiet theory is that the people who built these places shared a story about the animals, about the sky, about the dead, about the relationship between humans and the wild. Stories carry well across generations, even without writing. They can survive long migrations and slow changes in language. If such a story existed, it would have shaped the carvings, the gatherings, the songs, perhaps even the way the dead were treated. It might have woven together small bands of hunters into something larger than any single camp, a loose web of meaning held in common across the rolling hills. A different view suggests something more practical. Perhaps the connections we see are not the remains of a single belief, but the natural overlap of neighboring peoples who traded, married, and visited one another. Ideas would have moved with travelers. Symbols would have been borrowed and reshaped. There may have been no central story at all, only a shared toolkit of images that each community used in its own way. This view treats the resemblance as conversation rather than doctrine. Both pictures may hold some truth. What seems clear is that Gobekli Tepe did not exist in a vacuum. It was a node in a network we are only beginning to map. Each new site found in the region adds another thread. Each thread tugs gently at the timeline of human society, asking us to imagine a world of hunter-gatherers who were far more connected, far more thoughtful, and far more organized than the old textbooks allowed. They were not isolated bands wandering separately through the wilderness. They were neighbors. They knew each other. They may have walked long distances together at the same stones, under the same carved foxes, beneath the same patient sky. What they believed, what they sang, what they feared and hoped for, all of it has dissolved into the soil. Only the animals remain, gazing out from the limestone, keeping their long silence about the world that carved them. For many years, the hill on the Harran Plain stood alone in the public imagination. It seemed like a single bright candle in a dark room, a monument without family, a temple without a village, a question without a context. Then, slowly, the surrounding hills began to whisper. Other mounds, other shapes in the soil, other quiet rises in the landscape began to draw the attention of patient researchers. And the lonely hill turned out not to be lonely at all. Across the rolling country of southeastern Turkey, archaeologists have now identified a scattering of related sites. They lie within a half-day's walk of one another, dotted across the plain and the low hills like beads on a long, loose string. Some of these places carry T-shaped pillars, smaller than the famous ones, but cut in the same style. Some hold round buildings sunk into the earth. Some are little more than a low rise of stone and dust, waiting for a shovel that may never come. This network of sites has come to be called, in casual shorthand, the Tash Tepela, meaning the stone hills. It is not one temple, but many. It is not one community, but a whole quiet web of them, spread across a region that 12,000 years ago was greener and gentler than it is today. Streams ran where now there is dry grass. Trees stood where now there is open sky. The land could feed gatherers and hunters for long stretches of the year. The discovery of these neighbors changes the shape of the mystery in a soft but important way. The famous hill is no longer a single miracle. It is part of a tradition, part of a shared way of seeing the world, part of a culture that stretched across many days of walking. Whatever the builders believed, they believed it together, across distance, across small valleys, across generations. One nearby site holds a carved figure of a man, life-sized, his hands folded across his belly, his eyes hollowed into the stone. Another holds a small round room with a bench running along the inside wall, as if people once sat together in a circle and spoke quietly, or sang, or listened. Another holds pillars so similar to the famous ones that the same carving hand almost seems to have passed from hill to hill. What remains deeply unknown is how these places spoke to one another. Did the people of one hill walk to the next for festivals? Did they trade stones, songs, stories, marriage partners? Did each site serve a slightly different purpose, like rooms in a single great house spread across the land? Or were they rivals, each community building its own circle to match the others in a slow, quiet contest of devotion? The evidence is still gathering, and the answers shift with each new trench. The changes happening now are happening on two timelines at once. There is the slow timeline of the land itself, the way the soil has crept over these hills for 10,000 years, hiding them, protecting them, smoothing them into the shape of ordinary ground. And there is the faster timeline of the present, the careful seasons of excavation, the brushes and trowels, the publications, the slow growth of understanding. Each year, a little more emerges, a new pillar, a new wall, a new shape of room. The map of the stone hills keeps changing, and with it the picture of who these people were. 20 years ago, the famous site was almost the whole story. Today, it is a chapter in a much longer book, and most of that book is still buried. One idea is that the famous hill was a kind of central gathering place, a great shared sanctuary for many smaller communities scattered across the region. Another idea is that there was no center at all, that each site stood on its own, and the similarities are simply the shared language of a wider culture. A third possibility is that the role of each site shifted over the centuries, so that what was central in one generation became quiet in the next. None of these ideas has won. What is clear is that the lonely temple was never truly alone. It had neighbors, it had cousins, it had a world around it, and that world is slowly rising again from under the soil, hill by hill, pillar by pillar, season by season. The mystery is not shrinking as these neighbors appear. It is growing, opening outward, becoming a wider and quieter question about how the first builders of stone learned to dream together across the gentle hills of a long-vanished spring. Light as a way of finding the small things. In the quiet rooms of museums and the careful trenches of the dig, it slips across surfaces that the builders never expected anyone to see again. And in the year 2017, the soft white light of a laboratory revealed something at Gobekli Tepe that no one had quite expected. Fragments of human skull, found among the buried stones, carried strange marks, thin, deliberate grooves, carved lines, small drilled holes. The fragments were not many, only a few small pieces, taken from at least 3 different skulls. But the marks on them were unlike anything found at the site before. Researchers, studying them under bright lamps, saw careful cuts running along the top of the skulls, made with stone tools after the bone was already dry. The cuts were not the chaos of violence. They were the slow, patient work of someone shaping the bone for a reason we do not understand. One of the fragments carried a small drilled hole, a single perforation, made with care, in just the right place to pass a cord through. The image this brings to mind is a quiet one. A piece of skull, perhaps hung from a beam, perhaps suspended in the dim glow of a fire, the light flickering across the carved grooves, a presence kept close, for reasons the people who made it never wrote down. Researchers gave this finding a careful name. They called it possible evidence of a skull cult. The phrase sounds heavier than the bones themselves. It simply means a set of practices that focus on the skulls of the dead, often with reverence, sometimes with ceremony. Perhaps for remembering ancestors, perhaps for marking enemies, perhaps for something else entirely. Such practices appear in many ancient places. The Gobekli Tepe fragments are among the oldest hints of such treatment in the world. But what the marks actually meant, no one can yet say. One theory is that these skulls belong to revered ancestors. The cuts and holes may have allowed them to be displayed in the temple, watching over rituals, joined in some way to the carved pillars that already loomed above the gatherings. In this view, the dead remained part of the living community, lit by the same firelight, present at the same meals. A different theory looks the other direction. The marks could belong to outsiders, trophies perhaps, reminders of conflict. The same physical evidence carries very different meanings depending on whose skull it once was, and no one alive today can ask. The bones do not speak. They only carry the shape of someone's careful hands working in firelight thousands of years ago. A third possibility is gentler still. Some researchers wonder if the treatment had nothing to do with veneration or victory, and everything to do with grief. A way of holding on, a way of making the loss of someone close into something one could carry, or hang, or visit. The shaping of bone as the shaping of memory. We do not know. The light of the laboratory shows us what the cuts look like, but not what the heart behind them felt. What makes the find more striking is its setting. The skull fragments came from the fill that buried the temple, mixed with animal bones and broken tools. They were not laid out in any pattern researchers could read. They were scattered, as if the people who finally closed the site swept everything together at the end. So even the placement gives us no clear story. The fragments may have been kept somewhere else for generations before ending up in the soil. The carved animals on the great pillars include vultures, and some scholars have long wondered whether the vulture imagery and the skull treatment belong to the same set of beliefs. Other early sites in the region show paintings of vultures hovering near headless human figures. Some researchers see this as a hint of a sky burial tradition, where bodies were exposed to birds and skulls were later gathered and kept. Others find this connection too thin to trust. The pillars at Gobekli Tepe carry many creatures, and we cannot read which ones meant what. So the skull cult question sits where so many of the temple's questions sit, in a soft, uncertain light. A few small pieces of bone, marked by patient hands, found in the rubble of a place that was buried on purpose. The grooves are real. The holes are real. The meaning has dissolved into 12,000 years of silence. All that remains is the quiet image of someone, long ago, working a piece of skull by firelight, shaping it for a purpose only they would have understood. Tonight, let us listen for a sound that may have changed the world. Not a single sound, but a layered hum of voices and stone. Picture the hill in the dry season, before the temple was buried. Picture hundreds of people gathered on its slopes. The wind moves through the pillars. Somewhere, a chisel taps against limestone. Somewhere else, a low chant rises and falls. We cannot hear that sound now. The builders left no recordings, no instruments, no written songs. Yet the question of what filled the air at this place may hold a quiet clue to one of the deepest puzzles in human history. The puzzle is this: did the temple come first and the farm follow? Did the gathering at the stones teach people how to plant? For most of the last century, the standard story ran the other way. Farming came first. People settled down. They grew extra food. Only then, with full bellies and free time, could they build temples and cities. The plough led to the prayer. The grain led to the god. Then the hill on the Harran plain began to speak, and the order seemed to flip. The pillars are older than the oldest known farms. The carvings of foxes and snakes were cut into stone before anyone in the region had tamed wheat. Hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, somehow found the will and the muscle to raise a temple before they raised a single field of grain. One idea, sometimes called the temple first theory, suggests that the gathering itself created the farm. Picture the logistics of feeding hundreds of workers for weeks at a time. The visitors would have needed bread, porridge, something more than what nearby hunting could supply. To feed the builders, people may have started tending wild grasses near the site. They watered them, weeded them, harvested them. Slowly, without planning to, they began to choose the plumpest seeds. Over generations, those wild grasses became something new, something heavier, something that could not even scatter its own seeds without human help. Wheat, in other words, may have been the side effect of feeding a temple crew. Supporters of this idea point to the wild ancestors of einkorn wheat. Genetic studies trace its domestication to the Karakada Mountains, only a short walk, by ancient standards, from Gobekli Tepe. A competing view says the causation runs the opposite way, just more quietly than the old story. In this view, small-scale plant tending was already underway in the region. People were already experimenting with seeds, already storing grain in small amounts, already drifting toward a more settled life. The temple, then, was not the cause of farming. It was the result of a slow shift that was already happening. The pillars rose because food was already becoming more reliable, not because the pillars demanded it. A third group of researchers wonders if the two answers are tangled together. Perhaps the temple and the farm grew up side by side, each one nudging the other forward. Each feast called for more food. Each surplus of food allowed for a longer feast. The stones and the seeds may have danced together for centuries before anyone could say which one was leading. The sounds of that long dance are gone, but we can imagine them. The crackle of fires under stone troughs. Some of those troughs, carved into the bedrock, may have held thousands of liters of liquid. Some researchers wonder if they held a kind of early beer, brewed from wild grains. If so, the air around the pillars may have carried the warm, yeasty smell of fermentation, the sound of pouring, the sound of cups against stone. We do not know if these troughs truly held beer. The chemical traces are debated. Some scholars see clear evidence. Others see only the gentle staining of water and time. The question, like so many here, sits open. What stays with us is the strange new shape of the story. The plough may not have led to the prayer. The prayer, or something like it, may have led to the plough, or neither led the other, and both rose together like two notes in the same long chord. Listen for a moment to that imagined chord, the chant on the hill, the tap of stone, the hiss of grain poured into a basin, the low murmur of people who had walked for days to be there. Somewhere in that sound, perhaps, our settled world was being born. We cannot yet say for certain. We can only sit in the quiet and wonder. On the smooth faces of the pillars, between the carved foxes and the long-necked birds, there are other marks, smaller marks, quiet ones, shapes that do not look like animals at all. They look like signs. They look like symbols. They look, to some eyes, like the careful beginnings of a written language. And yet, no one alive can read them. These small carvings sit in groups, sometimes a circle beside a half moon, sometimes a row of straight lines, neatly spaced, as if counting something, sometimes an H shape, repeated again and again across different pillars, in different rings, by what may have been different hands. The repetition is the part that makes researchers pause. A doodle does not repeat across a whole site, a symbol does. One quiet possibility is that these marks are an early form of counting, a tally of seasons perhaps, a record of moons. The builders watched the sky every night of their lives, and the sky is, in its own way, a kind of mathematics. The moon swells and shrinks on a steady rhythm. The stars wheel overhead on a slow, predictable arc. A small carved line beside another small carved line could be the simplest math the world has ever known. One, and one more, and one more after that. A second possibility is that the marks are not numbers, but names, names of clans, perhaps, or names of the dead, or names of the spirits the builders believed lived in the stones. We have no way to test these guesses. The marks have no key, no second copy on the stone elsewhere that translates them into something familiar. They sit alone, 11,000 years old, holding their meaning in silence. A third possibility, more cautious still, is that they are not language at all. They may simply be marks made by the carvers to identify their own work, a signature in a sense, or a guide for placing one stone next to another. In that case, the symbols are practical, like a builder's chalk line, and not the seed of writing at all. Which of these is closest to the truth? No one can say. What is striking is how much the builders seem to have understood without writing anything down. The pillars stand in careful circles. The circles share a geometry that some researchers believe is too neat to be accidental. Recent studies have suggested that 3 of the largest enclosures may form a near-perfect triangle when viewed from above, their centers spaced with a quiet precision. Other researchers are more careful. They point out that humans see patterns easily, even when no pattern was intended. The triangle may be real. It may be a trick of our wishing eyes. If the geometry is real, it tells us something gentle and astonishing. It tells us that the people who shaped these stones could think in shapes larger than themselves. They could plan a building they could not see all at once. They could hold the idea of a circle in their minds while standing inside it. That is a kind of mathematics too. Mathematics of the body, of pacing out distances, of stretching a cord between 2 stakes and walking its slow arc through the dust. The ratios of the pillars themselves are worth a long, quiet thought. The tall central stones rise to about 5.5 meters. The shorter ones around them stand at a fraction of that height, repeated with care from one ring to the next. The spacing between them feels considered, not perfect, not machined, but considered, the way a careful weaver considers the spacing of threads. The builders worked without rulers, without numbers as we write them, without a single symbol we can read. And yet the harmony is there, soft and visible, 11,000 years later. The beauty of it is that the math, if math is what we should call it, is simple. A circle drawn around a center point, a line, walked between 2 stones. A count of nights kept on a flat, pale face of limestone. Nothing complicated, nothing that needed a school. Just the oldest tools the mind has ever owned. Pattern, rhythm, and repetition, applied with patience over many lifetimes. So the carvings sit there, on stones older than wheat, older than bread, older than any city. Some of them show animals we can name. Some show symbols we cannot. And somewhere in the quiet space between the two, between the fox and the H shape, between the vulture and the row of lines, a question rests. Were these people on the edge of writing, or were they speaking a language of stone we have simply forgotten how to hear? The answer, for now, stays carved and silent. When we picture hunter-gatherers, we tend to picture rough lives. We imagine cold nights, simple tools, and small bands of people moving from camp to camp with everything they own on their backs. The story we were taught in school made these people sound limited. They survived, but they did not yet build. They wandered, but they did not yet plan. The stones on the hill above the Harran Plain whisper a very different story. They whisper that hands without metal, without writing, without farms, somehow knew more than we have given them credit for. Think for a moment about what it takes to carve a T-shaped pillar from solid limestone. The worker must read the rock. They must see the grain inside the stone and choose where to strike. They must hold a steady angle for hours, then days, then weeks. A single wrong blow can split the pillar and waste months of work. The carvers at this site made very few of those wrong blows. The pillars stand smooth, balanced, and clean. Whoever shaped them had practiced this craft long enough to make hard stone feel almost soft under their hands. There is also the matter of the animals etched into the pillars. A fox curls along one shaft. A vulture spreads its wings on another. Snakes ripple in neat rows. These are not rough scratches. They are confident lines made by someone who had drawn that fox many times before, perhaps on wood, on hide, on cave walls long since lost. The skill did not appear from nothing. It came from a tradition we cannot see, because the softer materials that tradition used have all rotted away. Only the stone remains, and the stone is the last page of a much longer book. The balance of the site itself is delicate in another way. The pillars stand upright in stone sockets cut into the bedrock. Some of them are taller than 3 grown adults, stacked head to foot. They weigh as much as a small house, yet they rest in their sockets without falling. The builders understood how to brace them, how to angle them, how to share their weight against the inner walls of the circles. One miscalculation and a pillar would topple, perhaps crushing the people raising it. The fact that so many still stand 12,000 years later tells us the builders did not guess. They knew. How they knew is the open question. Some researchers think the knowledge built up slowly across many generations, passed down through stories and apprenticeships in places we have not yet found. Others wonder if they were specialists, a small group of skilled carvers who traveled between gatherings and shared their craft. A third view suggests that the building of the site itself was the school, that each new circle taught the next generation a little more. We do not yet know which of these ideas comes closest to the truth. We may never know. What we can say is that the conditions for this work were strangely favorable. The limestone in this region splits along clean plains, which makes large slabs possible. The climate, just after the last ice age, was milder and wetter than it is today. Wild grains grew thick on the slopes. Herds of gazelle moved through the valleys in numbers large enough to feed a gathering of hundreds for weeks at a time. Remove any one of those conditions, and the site might never have been built. Move the limestone 100 miles away, and the quarry becomes impossible. Shift the climate a few degrees colder, and the food supply collapses before the first pillar is raised. In that sense, the temple sits inside a fragile window, a narrow stretch of time when the land, the weather, the food, and the people all aligned. Before that window, the climate was too harsh. After it, the slow drift toward farming would change everything about how humans lived. The builders worked in the brief moment between those two worlds, and they used that moment to do something no one before them had ever tried. It humbles the modern mind to sit with this. We tend to think of skill as something that grows with technology, that each century improves on the last. The pillars suggest something gentler and stranger. They suggest that human hands have been capable of remarkable things for far longer than our timelines allow. The tools were simple. The minds were not. Somewhere on that hill, in the quiet pauses between hammer blows, people were thinking thoughts as careful and as patient as our own, and they were leaving a record in stone that we are still trying slowly to read. There comes a moment in the story of Gobekli Tepe when the voices fall away. The pillars still stand, the animals still watch from the stone, but the hands that shaped them, the feet that walked the worn floors, the fires that flickered against the carved limestone are gone. And the question that lingers over the buried hill is one of the softest and strangest in all of archaeology. Why did the builders leave? And once they left, why did no one come back? We do not know. That is the honest answer. The site was used for many centuries. Then, slowly or perhaps suddenly, the gatherings stopped. The fires were not relit. The carvers laid down their tools, and the people who had once climbed this hill in their hundreds began to climb it no more. One possibility is that the meaning of the place simply changed. Beliefs shift the way rivers shift. A spring that was sacred to one generation may be only a spring to the next. The stories that drew people across the hills may have softened over time, replaced by new stories told around new hearths in new villages. If that is true, then the silence at Gobekli Tepe is not a tragedy, it is only the quiet end of a long song. Another idea is that the world around the temple was changing too quickly for the old ways to hold. The wild herds were thinning, the grasses were being tended. People were learning to plant, to store, to stay. A temple built by wanderers may not have fit the lives of farmers. The new rhythm of seed and harvest may have pulled the gatherings apart, scattering them into smaller circles around smaller fields. There is a third possibility, and it is the one that lingers longest in the mind. The builders themselves may have chosen to close the temple. The deliberate backfilling, the careful covering of pillars with earth and rubble, suggests something more than abandonment. It suggests a goodbye, as if the people who had made this place also decided when its work was done. As if they buried it the way one might fold a beloved cloth and set it gently away. We cannot know which of these is closer to the truth. Perhaps all of them are true in different measures. Perhaps the answer is something we have not yet imagined, and there are smaller silences within the larger one. We do not know what language the builders spoke. We do not know the names they gave to the foxes and vultures carved into the stone. We do not know what songs were sung on the hill, or what stories were told beneath the wide night sky. We do not know if children played among the pillars, or if only certain people were allowed near them. We do not know whether the carvings were colored once, with pigments long since washed away, or whether they always stood in the pale tone of bare limestone. We do not know how the builders thought about time. Did they imagine their temple lasting forever? Did they expect it to be buried? Did they leave instructions passed from mouth to mouth across generations that one day the stones must be covered and the place returned to the earth? We do not know if there are older sites still waiting. Gobekli Tepe forced us to push the timeline back by thousands of years. Another hill, another quiet rise in the Anatolian plain, might push it back further still. The shovels have only touched a small part of the region. The hills keep their secrets patiently. These gaps are not failures of knowledge, they are openings. Each unanswered question is a doorway into something the next generation of researchers may walk through. The tools are improving. Ground-penetrating radar can see through soil without disturbing it. Chemical analysis can read the residue of ancient meals from the cracks in old stone. New methods of dating grow more precise each year. The silence after the builders left is not empty, it is waiting. And there is something gentle in sitting with that silence tonight. The builders were people like us. They loved and grieved and wondered. They looked at the same stars, breathed the same air, felt the same cool of evening on their skin. Whatever they believed, whatever they hoped, they poured into the stones. The stones are still here. The meaning has softened with time, but the care has not. You can feel the care even now in the careful curve of a fox's tail, in the patient cut of a pillar's edge. The builders left, but they did not leave nothing. They left a question, and the question is enough. Stand on the hill at Gobekli Tepe today, and you are standing on a question. Beneath your feet, by most estimates, lies more than 9/10 of the site. Only a small portion has been carefully uncovered. The rest waits below the soil, sleeping under the same yellow dust that hid it for 12,000 years. Ground-penetrating radar, a kind of underground echo where signals bounce off buried stone, has mapped at least 20 more enclosures still inside the hill. Some may be larger than anything dug up so far. Some may hold pillars we cannot yet imagine. What lies in those unopened circles is the gentle riddle of the next 100 years. Future archaeologists, with finer tools and slower methods, will lift the soil grain by grain. They may find new animals carved into limestone. They may find pillars taller than the ones we already know. They may find traces of pigment, faint stains of red or black, hinting that the stones were once painted in colors long since faded. Or they may find something stranger still, a buried object, a small chamber, a pattern of carvings that finally lets the whole story breathe. Whatever they uncover will be slow work. Each square of earth must be brushed, photographed, recorded. The ground itself is a kind of book, and turning a page too quickly can tear it. So the answers, if they come, will come at the speed of patience. A generation from now, much of the hill will still be sleeping. 2 generations from now, perhaps the picture will be a little clearer. The mystery is too large to solve in any single human lifetime. Beyond Gobekli Tepe, the nearby hills hold their own quiet secrets. Karahan Tepe, Sayburç, Harbatsuvan, and others form a scattered family of stone places across the same gentle plain. Some have been opened, most have not. Together they may tell a story far larger than any single site can hold. A whole culture, a whole way of seeing the world, a network of meeting places where hunter-gatherers gathered, carved, feasted, and then went home again into the deep green of the wild land. The shape of that network is still being drawn, slowly, year by year. Now lift your mind a little further. Imagine 1,000,000 years from now, the hills of southeastern Turkey will not look as they do today. Wind and rain are patient sculptors. The soft limestone will erode, grain by grain. Rivers will shift their beds. The Harran Plain may rise or sink with the slow breathing of the land. If any pillars still stand, they will be rounded, softened, half swallowed by time. The carvings of foxes and vultures may be only faint shadows on the stone. In 100 million years, the continents themselves will have moved. Africa is creeping north into Europe. The Mediterranean is closing, fold by fold, mountain by mountain. The land where Gobekli Tepe rests may be pushed up into new highlands, or pressed down beneath new seas. The temple, if any trace of it remains, may lie far below a future ocean floor, sealed in stone like a fossil of human longing. In 1 billion years, the picture grows stranger and softer still. The sun will be hotter, slowly brightening with age. Earth's oceans may begin to thin. The land we know will be unrecognizable, gathered into new supercontinents whose names no one has yet invented. Somewhere within those rocks, perhaps, will be a thin layer of compressed limestone, holding the faintest chemical memory of carved pillars. A whisper in the geology, a line in the strata that future minds, if any walk this world, might puzzle over the way we now puzzle over Gobekli Tepe. And yet, the universe is also always making new things. New stones will rise, new caves will form, new creatures will gather under new skies and make new marks on new walls. The impulse that built the temple, the gathering of hands, the shaping of stone, the wish to mean something together, may show up again in shapes we cannot guess. It may already be showing up, quietly in places we have not yet thought to look. For now, the hill keeps most of its story. The buried circles wait. The unexcavated pillars stand patiently in the dark, leaning a little against the soil, holding their carvings close. Whatever they have to say, they have been saying it for 12,000 years without hurry. They can wait a little longer. So can we. The future of this mystery is long and quiet and full of room for wonder. Step back now, as far back as the mind can comfortably wander. Imagine looking down at the hill from far above, then farther still, until the hill is only a small wrinkle on the wide curve of the Harran Plain. Pull back farther, and the plain becomes a pale patch on the brown skin of a continent. Farther still, and the continent is just one of several shapes on a slowly turning blue and white sphere. Somewhere on that sphere, 12,000 years ago, small groups of humans gathered to lift stones. For most of the time our species has existed, no one built anything like Gobekli Tepe. Modern humans have walked the earth for around 300,000 years. For the first 96% of that span, we left almost no monuments behind. We made tools, we painted on cave walls, we buried our dead with care, but we did not raise circles of carved limestone pillars. Then, in a thin slice of time near the end of the last ice age, something shifted, and on that quiet hill in southern Turkey, the shift left a mark we are still trying to read. The widest view makes the mystery feel even gentler. The atoms in those limestone pillars were once tiny sea creatures, drifting through warm, shallow oceans long before any human lived. There, shells settled on the seafloor over countless slow years. The seafloor became stone. The stone rose with the slow lifting of the land. And then, much later, a hand reached down and chose that stone, and another hand carved a fox into its face. The fox was made of the same calcium as the sculptor's own bones. This is the quiet truth that runs underneath every part of the Gobekli Tepe mystery. The builders were not separate from the world they carved. They were made of it. The limestone in the pillars, the flint in their blades, the water they drank from springs in the hills, the wheat that would one day grow on the plain below, all of it shared the same atoms, sorted and rearranged by deep time. When they stood the pillars upright, they were, in a sense, the earth lifting pieces of itself into a circle and looking around. The question of why they did it sits inside a larger question about who we are. Some researchers wonder whether the urge to gather, to build, to mark a place as meaningful, is older and deeper than any single culture. Others suggest the urge appeared only when certain conditions aligned: a warming climate, plentiful game, larger groups meeting more often. Both views may hold pieces of the truth. Both leave room for wonder. What the hill seems to whisper is that the old story we told ourselves was too simple. We used to imagine a tidy ladder, first the farm, then the village, then the temple, then the city. Gobekli Tepe gently turns the ladder on its side. Here, it seems, was a temple before the farm, a meeting place before the town, a shared idea perhaps, before the shared field. The order of things is not what we assumed. That single shift ripples outward. If belief and gathering came first, then the foundations of organized human life may rest on something less practical and more mysterious than survival. Maybe people learned to live together, not only to eat, but to wander together. Maybe the first reason to stay in one place was not a granary but a circle of stones where stories could be told under the stars. This is only one possibility. Others remain open. The evidence is too thin to crown any single answer. And so the hill becomes a small mirror. Look into it long enough, and you see your own species looking back, very young, very curious, standing on a windy ridge, with cold stone in their hands and warm breath rising into the dawn. They did not know they were beginning anything. They were simply doing what felt important: carving a fox, lifting a pillar, sharing a meal, watching the sky. We do the same thing still, in different shapes. We gather, we build, we mark places as meaningful. We carve our own faces into the stone of memory, hoping someone, someday, will wonder about us. The hill suggests this is not a new habit. It is one of the oldest things about us, perhaps the oldest. Tonight the pillars stand quietly under the same stars the builders watched. The same atoms move through the same slow cycles. The same questions drift up from the ground like soft mist. We do not have the answers. We have only the shape of the question, carved long ago, waiting patiently in the dark. And so we come to the end of our long, slow walk around the hill. The stones are still there tonight. They have been there for around 12,000 years. While we have been speaking, they have not moved. The wind has brushed against them the same way it brushed against them when the builders were still alive. The carved fox still runs along his pillar. The carved vulture still spreads his wings. The T-shaped giants still stand in their quiet rings, watching nothing, waiting for nothing, simply being. We do not know why they were built. We do not know who exactly built them. We do not know what songs were sung around them, or what words were spoken, or what the builders believed when they looked up at the night sky. We do not know why the whole hill was gently covered with earth and left to sleep beneath the grass. These questions are still open. They may stay open for a long time. They may stay open forever. That is all right. Some mysteries are gifts. They give us something to wonder about when the lights are low and the world has gone soft around the edges. Picture the hill now, in this very moment, on the other side of the world. The sun has set over the Heron Plain. The limestone has cooled. A thin wind moves across the dry grass. Somewhere beneath the surface, pillars that have not seen daylight in 12,000 years are still standing, patient, perfect, waiting their turn. Above them, the stars are coming out, one by one, the same stars the builders once knew, arranged in slightly different patterns because the sky itself has slowly turned. Picture the earth from a great distance, a round blue world wrapped in soft white clouds. Oceans glow faintly under the moon. Forests breathe in the dark, deserts cool. Rivers carry water down to seas that have risen and fallen many times. On one small hill in one small country, a few rings of stone rest under a blanket of soil, and the planet turns them slowly through the night, the way it has turned them every night for 12,000 years. You are part of that turning. Your bed, your room, the soft weight of the blanket over you, all of it is moving too, carried by the same gentle spin that carries the hill. We are all small passengers on a quiet, patient world. The world does not need us to solve every mystery. It only needs us to rest, sometimes, and let the wondering happen on its own. The builders rested too. Their hands, which shaped the pillars, eventually grew still. Their voices, which must have echoed across the rings on feast nights, faded into the air and were carried away by the wind. But the stones they shaped are still here. The questions they left behind are still here. And tonight, those questions have been keeping you company. There is something kind about that. People who never knew you, who lived before farming, before writing, before cities, before almost everything we call history, reached forward across all that time and gave you a puzzle to hold while you fell asleep. They could not have known you would exist. They could not have known their hill would one day be uncovered. And yet, here we are, in the quiet, thinking about them. Let the thinking grow softer now. Let the foxes and the cranes and the long-eared rabbits on the pillars step gently into the background of your mind. Let the T-shaped giants fade into the dark. Let the Heron Plain stretch out, calm and empty, under its blanket of stars. Let the earth turn. Let the questions stay open. They will still be open in the morning. They will still be open next year and the year after that. And they will be waiting for someone, someday, to learn just a little more. For tonight, you do not need to know. You only need to rest. The hill is sleeping. The pillars are sleeping. The soil that covers them is sleeping. The world, in its long and patient way, is sleeping too, and so, gently, may you. Whatever the builders meant by their stones, they made something that still gives comfort after 12,000 years. That is a quiet kind of miracle. Carry it with you into your dreams. Carry the open question, the soft stone, the silent watchers, the slow turning earth. Let them all settle around you like a blanket. There is no hurry. There is nothing to solve. There is only the wondering and the resting and the long, kind night. Subscribe for a brand new Earth topic every night. One tap and something wonderful is waiting for you tomorrow. Sweet dreams.